Okay, we're on the heart. They're on the last part of the cardiovascular system. We're on the last part of the cardiovascular system. So I'm gonna go really quickly through the anatomy of the heart because I want to get to the physiology because that's where the questions lie. So I'll just give you kind of like a quick overview of the heart. Then we're going to go into the function of it. So 4 chambers. So when you look at the heart, we have to look at the relationship between the lungs and the body's tissues. We are trying to deliver oxygen to all the tissues or cells. Right? Tissues are just groups of cells. So we're trying to deliver oxygen to all the tissues in the body. So where do you get the oxygen? You get it in your lungs. Then that oxygen goes into the blood, and then it goes to all the cells in your body. And then we have to get the waste product back, carbon dioxide. So that's going back to the lungs. So carbon dioxide is going back. So those, I'm not going to check it. I know I'm just moving around, sorry. These go through two different types of vessels, right? Because you have 2 different types of blood. You have blood that has a lot of oxygen in it. You have blood that doesn't have so much oxygen in it. So oxygenated blood versus deoxygenated blood. Your book will say oxygen-rich blood and oxygen-poor blood. That's a more accurate way to look at this. But it's but I'm calling it oxygenated and deoxygenated, right? So when we're trying to get blood to all the tissues, that's oxygenated blood. And then when blood is going away from the tissues, like it's leaving, it's already been there, that's deoxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood has a higher proportion of carbon dioxide than you would find in oxygenated. So 2 different types of vessels, right? You head towards all the tissues on one vessel, and you come back on the other one. Usually, but not always, it's arteries and veins, right? So the arteries, not always, but mostly, the arteries are going to have oxygenated blood, and the veins are going to have deoxygenated blood. There is an exception to that we'll talk about. But anyway, going back and forth, the heart is the thing that is mediating this. You've got the heart, that's the pump. So really, when the lungs get oxygen, the lungs send that blood to the heart, and the heart sends that blood out to the tissues. Same thing here. The tissues send that blood, the deoxygenated blood, back to the heart, and the heart is the one that sends it to the lungs. So the heart's just a middleman. So the heart's in the middle of all this. The heart is the one that's pumping all of this. The heart is the one that's pumping the blood all the way down to your feet and pumping the blood back up to the heart again. So, down to your feet, back up to the heart. Well, what happens when the heart gets it? Well, it sends that blood to the lungs to get oxygen. And then when it gets the oxygen back, it sends it back out to the tissues. Gets back the waste product, sends that waste product out to the lungs, gets the good stuff back, sends it like that. So with that in mind, let me draw the heart. Not how it is, but I'll just draw it as a box. It's essentially a pump, and we're going to divide that in half and So there's a right side and there's a left side of the heart. And it's written backwards here because anatomical position, right? So it's like as if my heart's facing you. So this is my left side, this is my right side. So the right side of the heart is only going to deal with deoxygenated blood. At least once you're born. The right side of the heart deals with deoxygenated blood only. And then by process of elimination, the left side of the heart deals with oxygenated blood. Or again, oxygen-rich blood, oxygen-poor blood. But there's two types of blood in you. So we have a right side and we have a left side. They don't mix. Now we have a receiving part, which we call atria, or for singular, atrium. Those receive blood, and then you have sending the blood out, ventricles. Or ventricle for singular, doesn't mean. Atrium and ventricles. Right, so you have a right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Those are 4 chambers, grooves, right? So those are the 4 chambers of the heart. And we can figure out, if we think of the heart, lung, the lungs and the tissues, arrows. So now we know these 2 are sending blood out. So the question is, where is this blood going to? This blood is on its way out of the heart. Where? So the right side, let's start with that. The right side only deals with deoxygenated blood. So here's the heart, and it's shipping out deoxygenated blood. So you're not going to send that to all of your cells. You're not going to send that to your brain. It's deoxygenated. There's only one place that you can send it. So you want to send it to the lungs. Because you want to get it oxygenated. So you send that blood out to the lungs and you get it oxygenated. And now it's on its way back. Well, it's oxygenated. So this side of the heart only deals with oxygenated. So now it's on its way back. So it goes to the left side, the left atrium, which is the receiving. So now we have oxygenated blood, and the atrium is going to hand that blood off to the ventricles. And where are the ventricles going to send it? Everywhere, to all your tissues. Like that. So I got a lot of crap going on here, but so it leaves from one side, it comes back to the other side. So this is leading through all these arteries. So all these arteries are traveling through your body and feeding your body, and then it's coming back through all the veins. So all the veins become this big blood vessel called the vena cava, and that's going to go into the right atrium. And the right atrium is going to give that blood to the right ventricle. Right ventricle is going to send that blood out to the lungs. Here, this is an artery also. This is a pulmonary artery. It's the exception, right? It's an artery, but it's not carrying oxygenated blood. It's carrying deoxygenated blood because arteries go away from the heart. Veins are going toward the heart. That's how we name them, by the direction of the blood flow. So in this case, this is going away from the heart because it's on its way to the lungs, so it's a pulmonary artery. And then this is on its way back to the heart, so that's going to be a pulmonary vein. So that's kind of the exception to the veins and arteries, right? Usually a vein, we imagine it as carrying deoxygenated blood. Your book is color-coding it blue. And it's coloring the arteries red, right? But there's the exception. The pulmonary artery, that's deoxygenated blood. Pulmonary vein, oxygenated blood. Questions so far? In between, when you leave a room, you go through a door. So we have 4 rooms here, 4 chambers, 2 atria, 2 ventricles. So when you go from an atrium and you leave, and the blood leaves an atrium, it goes through a valve. And so you've got a valve in between each atrium and each ventricle. And that valve is it's a one-way valve. That door only opens this way into the ventricle. So blood cannot go back. If it tries to go back, it closes the door. So the door only opens into the ventricle. These valves are in between the atrium and the ventricle. So we call these 2 valves AV, because they're in between the atrium and ventricle. So they're AV valves. Or we can call them atrioventricular valves, but just AV is fine. So those 2 are AV valves. You've also got 2 valves when you leave the ventricle. And I'm not writing them in the right place, I'm just trying to get you to see how the heart works. You've got 2 valves when you leave the ventricle, and that's because once the blood leaves the heart, it needs to stay out of the heart and not come back in. So we call these semilunar valves. To be more precise, this valve right here is called tricuspid. It's got like 3 cusps. This valve here, you can call it bicuspid or you can call it mitral. Mitral's better. So you have the tricuspid valve on the right side and the mitral valve on the left side. Those are your 2 AV valves. 2 semilunar valves. This one's easy because this is going, after this valve, it's going to go to the lungs. So we call this a pulmonary valve. Nobody calls it the pulmonary semilunar valve. They just call it a pulmonary valve. But these 2 are called semilunar, like half moon. So these 2 together, they're semilunar valves. The one on the right side is called pulmonary. The one on the left side is called aortic. And they're really in reference to the vessels that they're going in. Because after this valve, the blood's going to go into the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary trunk, really, but pulmonary artery. And then this one is going to go, this side is going to go into the aorta. So we have 4 chambers, 4 valves. Valves keep everything moving in one direction, no backflow. Okay. So I expect that you would have already watched the videos, but if you haven't, you should be you should go over especially the introduction one, and see what a heart looks like. Another good video you can do is you can go on Khan Academy. They have a good video. Do like Khan Academy, blood flow through the heart. It's pretty good, and it gives you everything that that I would want you to know in here. So, all right, cardiac muscle works a little bit differently. The physiology is a little bit different than our skeletal muscle, right? The cardiac muscle kind of looks like skeletal muscle, but it acts differently. With our skeletal muscle, we can, for example, if I go to lift this pen, I'm contracting my bicep right now. And so I'm contracting my bicep muscles and I'm using it to lift this pen. But not all the muscles are needed. Not all my fibers. I'm not using all the muscle fibers to lift it, right? But if I go to lift this table, now I'm recruiting other muscle fibers because this table's too heavy for my bicep to do it, right? So I've got different, your skeletal muscle can work at different gradations, right? I can go at 50% or 100% or in between. Your heart muscle, it all goes at one time. Your heart is 100% or it's not going. So what's going to happen is that when you look at a heartbeat, the top part of the heart beats first. The atria contract. Then the ventricles contract. Then it relaxes. So look at the heart, the cycle of the heart. Look at it in three parts. Atria contract, ventricles contract, relax. So it's like that. Atria, ventricles contract. I'm actually surprised that I can do that and be that coordinated. So there you go. Atria contract, ventricles contract, whole heart relaxes like that. That's the three parts. So when the atria contract, it's going at 100%. There's no part contraction. Not like with your skeletal muscles. It's going at 100%. Same thing with your ventricles. So all the fibers, all the muscle fibers of your ventricles are contracting simultaneously. So when muscles contract, there's electrical things going on with all your muscles. And your heart's no different. Your heart's no different. So I'm going to erase this and let me just draw like a muscle fiber. So there is a muscle fiber or a muscle cell, right? A muscle fiber is a muscle cell, right? And then it's a cell. There's like a nucleus in here, and this is like the membrane. And with muscle, we call these things like sarcolemma. And but anyway, it's a muscle cell, just like you had last semester. And you have different minerals or electrolytes that are going to influence this. And so you should, although we might talk about this if we're behind right now, so maybe we won't get to it. But there's different electrolytes in your body, and they make different things happen. We've talked about one already. We talked about sodium, and I kept writing it as Na+. So one thing that you should, sodium is one of the electrolytes, right? So electrolytes are just minerals that your body uses a lot. They're called major minerals. And they always have charges. So all these minerals in your body, they have charges. The fact that they have charges is what makes them work their magic, right? So electrolytes do things like move water around your body. So we talked about that, how sodium, wherever sodium goes, the water is going to follow it. But there's other things they do. Your nerves firing, your muscles firing, all the electrical stuff that goes on in your body, that's electrolytes that make it happen. In particular, although there's many, but there's three in particular that I'd like to discuss. Sodium, potassium, which you always think of as being positively charged, and calcium. I'm putting two little pluses there just because that's what it is. It's a little bit, it's whether you lose, all these have lost electrons, and that's what makes them positively charged. So here's three, and they like to be in different places in your body. So when you look at minerals, you have to think about your body in terms of things that are inside of your cell and things that are outside of your cell. So those are like two different compartments in your body. For example, if you think about blood, there's your red blood cells. right? And then there's the plasma that these cells float in. So your red blood cells are, things inside your red blood cells are intracellular. Or we call that like an intracellular fluid. So to abbreviate it, I'll just say like ICF, right? Intracellular fluid. And then outside, extracellular fluid. Extra meaning outside. Cellular cell fluid. The fluid in your cells that's outside. Or I should say the fluid that's outside of your cells. Just something very simple. Yeah, I made it more complex. So that's how we can look at things, like what's in your cell and what's outside of your cell. These tend to have preferences. Sodium is extracellular. You will learn about this. If not in this class, you're eventually going to learn about it, whatever you're studying. Sodium is always extracellular. Sodium likes to hang out outside of cells. Not that it won't go in, but it tends to hang out outside. Potassium tends to hang out inside. So potassium is intracellular. Calcium tends to do both. It's an extracellular. Calcium also tends to hang out outside. So these two, sodium and potassium, you're always going to find them working together. Sodium and potassium, are you okay with this? Are you sure?
I'm glad with it.
I know we're far away, but I don't want to be like, sodium and potassium are usually found together. Not that they're hanging out together, but they work together. In fact, they don't like to be in the same place at the same time. But, so for now, let me just put some potassium inside the cell, because that's where they live. And I'm going to put some sodiums outside of the cell. I just did 3 randomly. But there's a bunch of sodium outside your muscle cell, and there's a bunch of potassium inside your muscle cell. Forget about calcium for right now. What I'm trying to show you is that there's 3 pluses, there's 3 positively charged things in your cell, and there's 3 positively charged things outside of your cell. Yes, it's sodium and potassium, they're different, but if we're just looking at the plus signs, positively charged, they're equal, they're balanced. So we call this polarized. We can say that it's polarized. So what's going to happen is that we want this muscle cell, this muscle fiber to contract, to shorten. Right, so we want to get that, like that actin and myosin working, and we want to get it all shortened. So what happens to start this process is that there's like these gates. There's like these gates on the cell membrane, and they're special for sodium, and they're going to open up, and they're going to let the sodium in the cell. So the sodium is going to rush into the cell. So I've thrown off the balance. The whole feng shui is effed up now. All the pluses are inside the cell. None of them are outside of the cell. Now it's not polarized anymore. It's actually depolarized. So that's what we're going to call it. This is depolarization. That's a common word that's used. So it means you could, I don't know, maybe say it's electrified. Yeah, I'm expecting that that this cell is now going to contract. As a result of this, this cell should start to contract and get smaller. So when your muscles contract, that's because your muscles are polarized or depolarized. So you depolarize your muscles. I'm depolarizing my bicep muscles, and that's allowing them to go bring me the coffee up to my mouth. So that's the first step of a muscle cell contracting, depolarization. So it depolarizes. Now, because sodium and potassium don't like to be together. They're really good at raising children together, but they work different shifts, and when one gets home, the other one's like, gotta go to work. So potassium starts to leave. So I'll just do one. There's one potassium that left. The other ones didn't leave yet. Okay, so what happens is that like now one left, but what happens is that calcium is going to start trickling in to replace it, at least to some extent. So calcium trickles in. We're going to hold that depolarization. We're going to hold it for a little bit. So we call this a plateau. If you look at like a line representing a contraction of a fiber, it goes like this. There's like a depolarization, then there's a plateau, and then then it starts to repolarize. So this was the sodium rushing in. Some potassium's leaving, but the calcium is trickling in to match it. So we're holding that contraction for a brief second. We call that a plateau phase. Calcium is trickling in. But eventually the potassium is going to rush out faster than the calcium trickles in. So even though we have like a little bit of calcium trickling in, it doesn't matter because the potassiums are going to rush out, and then this whole muscle starts to relax again. So we call this repolarization. It's going to repolarize again. So sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out. So sodium rushes in, calcium trickles in, potassium rushes out. At the end, what's happening with the calcium? The calcium's going to end up, like once all the potassium leaves, the calcium's going to turn around and walk back out. So you end up with this state here that they've swapped places. So all the sodium rushed in, they're all crowded in there, then the potassium rushed out. Now they're back to being balanced again. And because of repolarization, this muscle fiber is going to relax. Here's kind of a weird thing that happens. Before they start over again, they're going to swap places. There's like these doors. It's like a sodium-potassium pump. I envision it like one of those revolving doors. And for me to like leave the hotel, go on one side of that revolving door, as like a sodium, the potassium's got to be on the other side of that door. So they both go through at once. Right, so that's what they do. They're going to swap places, and it's kind of weird. So before they do a heartbeat again, they're going to go right back to where they were originally. So the sodium, for every one sodium that goes back to its place, potassium goes back to its place. I know that's kind of weird. It doesn't really make sense. We don't know why it happens. Like, why didn't they just, instead of doing this, why didn't I wrote it right back. You guys see what I did? I wrote the exact same thing again. I meant to put the potassiums back home inside. Anyway, so after repolarization, they swap places again. And then they start right again. They swapped places, but now the sodium's going to turn around and rush right back in again. even though they just swap places. And that starts the depolarization. Sodium rushes in, calcium rushes in. I'm sorry, calcium kind of trickles in. Potassium rushes out. That's what makes it contract and relax. But we use these words. For example, if you look at an EKG, which we'll look at, well, I'm going to draw one up on the board. That's all about depolarization and repolarization. When you look at an EKG, you're seeing what's happening with, what's happening with the atrium. Well, you know what? Just draw it now. You guys have any questions on this? You see why these are important electrolytes, right? A potassium deficiency or too much, that's going to mess you up. Your heart muscles. Calcium not having enough, that's why you get osteoporosis, right? That's parathyroid hormone going to go into your bones and take the calcium out because you need it here. This is your heart's muscle cells. This is your heart cardio fibers, they call them. This is your myocardium. We're talking about the cells of the heart. That's way more important than whatever's going on in your bone. We need calcium to make your heart beat. We need potassium and we need sodium to make your heart beat. So that's why it's important to not be deficient in these electrolytes. If we look at an EKG, it looks something like, I don't know, like that, and then I can never keep it, something like this, whatever, and like that. All right, there's like 3 parts to an EKG. So you see there's like this here, and this here. So we call this one T, just in alphabetical order. We call this whole thing a QRS complex, and this is a little, did I mess it up? I did. God. P wave, QRS, T wave. And I sat there and told you it's in alphabetical order, and then I put T, and then I put Q after it. P wave, QRS complex, T wave. There's 3 parts to this EKG. So the EKG is looking at the electrical activity. It's looking at these things. So the P wave is measuring atrial depolarization. It's saying that the electrical, all the sodiums are rushing into the cells in the 2 atrium. So atrial depolarization is telling me that the atrium are about to contract because they're getting, all the sodiums are rushing in. So that's depolarization. That's going to mean contraction. That lets me know that the atrium contracted. QRS complex is going to tell me that the ventricles are contracting or about to contract. This is ventricular depolarization. So the atrium are polarizing here, the ventricles are polarizing here. And then the T wave, the last one's the T wave. And the T wave is ventricular repolarization. T wave is atrial depolarization. T wave is atrial depolarization. QRS is ventricular depolarization. T wave is ventricular repolarization. In other words, relaxation. If you remember what I did with my hands, atrium contract, ventricles contract, heart relaxes. It's kind of the same thing. Atrium are going to contract, ventricles are going to contract, whole heart is relaxing. But that T wave is looking at the ventricles in particular. And when you look at it, you can kind of figure out things that go, what goes wrong. People that read it, they're really good at it. I suck at it. I can do this one. I know that. That's ACEs. I'm good at that. And I know this, some kind of tachycardia. I'm good at that. Everything else is just kind of. So anyway, that's an EKG. So you should at least know the three parts, right? As far as like interpreting it and stuff, that'll be for another class. And good luck to you. It comes with practice, that's all it is. People that do it all the time. I know if this section right here, if you're having like a heart attack, sometimes this is raised up. So it'll be hard, again, heart attacks look like 1,000 different ways, but maybe something like that. Like I'm not, this thing here is a little higher than it is. This is like an ST section or whatever. I mean, that might be like a heart attack, or if you have like an embolism, like a pulmonary embolism, you might see this thing elongated out, right? So if it's elongated out, or if I see this, like I'll see this, and then it'll be like a straight line, right? And then you'll see this again. So you'll see like one here, another next to it. Sometimes people with like, it's a bundled branch block. I'll explain that in a second, but you know what, let's just, anyway, there's different things that it does, and when you look at, when you think about how like a 12 lead, or let's do a 12 lead, if you think about how like a 12 lead is set up, you're putting 2 leads up here, and so they're going down here, and then you've got however many, can't think of it right now, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. You got them down here. I think it's like 4, right? And that's looking, because if you look at the heart's here, but it's kind of like the apex of the ventricle is kind of going a little bit this way. So you're going around the apex of the ventricle, and it's going up this way, and then you got 2 up here that are coming down this way, right? So usually you've done like you also have a 4 lead. You know what? That's a whole other thing, but that's what it's looking more at the ventricles than it's looking at the atrium. So if you're wondering like, why is the P wave the atrium, but this is a ventricle and this is a ventricle? We talked about the ventricle twice. It's really more important to look at what's going on in the ventricles. Because the atria, think about what the atria do, they just receive blood. That's a little bit passive, right? They're not doing a massive amount of work compared to the ventricles. The left ventricle has to send blood, remember, all the way down to your feet and all the way back to the heart. That's a lot of work. The right atrium is what? Receiving blood from the lungs, or the left atrium is receiving blood from the lungs. That's like next door. So that's not even a lot of, your blood's going from here and getting received here. You don't have to do that much. So, but I'd like you to have an idea of the 3 parts. What is the P wave? What is the QRS complex? And what is the T wave? I just want you to know the 3 parts. So, know the 3 parts. I want you to know what causes depolarization, what causes repolarization. In fact, what causes the plateau. Right? So I want you to know that when something is depolarized, that's because the sodium is rushing through these sodium channels. like these little gates in the membrane of the cell. They're running through these sodium channels, and they go into the cardiac cell. That's going to depolarize it. Potassium is then going to start. Calcium is going to start trickling in. That's the plateau phase, and then potassium is going to start leaving. That's repolarization. So there's actually two questions there. One is how we create an action potential. How is the action potential generated? The action potential, that means like the spark, like the electrical spark of your heart. What's getting this thing going? Like how is your cells contracting? And the second thing here, I applied that to the EKG. So what are the three parts of the EKG? When you look at the path that this electrical signal takes through the heart, it follows a certain order, right? So there's a certain part of your heart that the pacemaker, that's what generates the first action potential, and then from there it spreads. So you have, when you see a heart, it obviously doesn't look anything like this, but I'm not good at drawing the heart. So right atrium, when you look inside of the right atrium, there's like a little dot up there, close. We call this the septum. In between this and this two ventricles, this is a septum. And in between these two, that's also a septum. Atrial septum, ventricular septum, your nose between the two nostrils, septum, right? So close to the atrial septum in the right atrium is your sinoatrial node. That's the pacemaker. That's where the action potential emanates from. From there, it goes to another node a little further down, and we call that the AV node. Atrioventricular, right? It's close to these two AV valves. So from the SA node, you can call it SA node, by the way, sinoatrial. From the SA node, then that action potential travels. It's like it's radiating out, right? So it goes from here to here, and as it goes down, it's radiating out, and it's making all the atrium contract. Then it goes to the the AV node. Then it's gonna go into the. This is actually a little bit. I just drew a line, but it's really like a wall of muscle. It's going to go into the septum, so it's going to go right there, and then it's going to go here. So we call this the bundle of His. Or if you want to call it an AV bundle, it's fine too. So it's like an atrioventricular bundle, but it's going down to here, and then it's going to split. Once it gets into the septum here, the ventricular septum, this action potential splits into two. I'm going to draw like red. So it's like there, and now it's probably made hard to see on camera, but I'm splitting it. It's going to split into two, and it's going to come around like this. So when it splits into two, we just call those bundle branches. It's like a left bundle branch and a right bundle branch. And then it curves around the bottom of the heart on each side. So it's curving around the bottom of each ventricle, and we call that Purkinje fibers. I have all this in the video. So that's the order. Sinoatrial node, that's the pacemaker of the heart. AV node, AV bundle, or bundle of His. Bundle branches, the left and the right bundle branch, are Purkinje fibers. I was telling you about like the EKG. It looks like whatever, and then there's like a space, and then it goes again. And then you keep looking at it, and it keeps getting like longer. And then it drops off. So the space between each one should be about the same, right? But it gets like longer, longer, then it drops off completely. Like you're waiting for the next one, it's not even there. And then you start seeing it again. That's like that could tell you that like something's blocked in here. Or sometimes when people get like tachycardia, this is your pacemaker, right? The SA node. This is where it all starts. It all starts with the SA node. But you get a whole bunch of your cells start to act like the SA node. So you get right here in this ventricular bundle, right here, you get a bunch of SA nodes. So they're all firing off. They all want to be first. So then it's got to be in the right order, right? You got to go from here to here to here. You got to do it in the right order. You can't go here and then you got something going here at the same time. It's effing it all up. Instead of going contract, relax, this is contracting like normal. This is all like going like this. So it has like a cadence to it, right? It's got to be at the right cadence. Can't have one part of your heart going like too slowly or too fast. But I want you to know this. That's the conduction system. And it's just, if I ask you, it'll just be as simple as listing it out, just like I have up there. You won't have to explain where are they. But if you look at a video, you can see it. It's like very clear. There's little short like video clips, like 5 seconds, right? And they just show you the action potential spreading through the heart. And then you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So that order. That's the third. We're up to three questions so far, right? Yeah. That's 3 questions. So all this has really been electrical so far. We've just talked about electrical things. Does anybody have any questions? All right, let's look at it in a different way. That kind of incorporates a few different things, and this is the cardiac cycle. If you understand the cardiac cycle, then you really have a good idea of how the heart works. So the cardiac cycle is all the events associated with one heartbeat. Your book, your text has it in 6 different parts, because this is a cycle, right? It has it broken down into 6 different parts. I like to break it down into 3, but I mean, it doesn't matter. However you learn it, it's all the same stuff, right? All the same material. It's what's going on when the heart beats. Something trying to get in.
So I broke it down into the same 3 parts that you find on the EKG. So what happens first when the heart beats? The ventricles are going to contract. I mean the atria are going to contract. So we call that, we're not calling that depolarization. Depolarization just talks about the electrical thing. Here we're talking about the contraction, so we're going to call this atrial systole. Systole is contraction. That's what it means, contraction. Then after the atrium contract, then what contracts next? The ventricles, right? So that's the second part, ventricular systole. Then the whole heart relaxes, so we just call that relaxation. And it's an important step, relaxation. Heart's got to relax. You've got to let the atria fill back up with blood. You've got to give it a second. You can't just keep going like this, right? Tachycardia. You can't just keep going tachycardia. You need time for the atria to fill with blood. You need time for the ventricles to fill with blood. So you got to you can't keep going. You're not going to deliver blood. I mean, your heart can beat a little bit faster and you could deliver more blood, but at some point it doesn't work. You're going too fast and you don't allow your heart the time to refill. So then every time your heart's beating, it's not pushing any blood out. So you got to give it time to relax. So let's talk about each of these steps, things that happen. Well, here, because it's like a circle, right? It keeps after relaxation, then you have atrial systole. So since it's like a cycle, I got to start somewhere. The blood, the heart, this is the atria. The 2 atria they're already filled with blood. In fact, they have filled with blood, and that blood, most of that blood had dropped into the ventricle already. So that's kind of where I'm starting. So most blood, I'm just going to use the word dropped. You guys see out this far? Yeah, you can. Not all of the blood, but most. Most of the blood, because it's like this, I'm just drawing one atrium and one ventricle, right? Here's an atrium. Here's a ventricle. So when the heart's relaxed, blood's filling this atrium. It's just kind of dropping in. There's the vena cava, and the blood's just filling it up, right? And then here's the valve, and it's like a trap door. When it gets heavy enough or enough pressure, that valve is just going to pop open, and then everything's going to fall in. But right here, it's not enough blood, right? So then a little bit more blood. At some point, when you get enough blood in there, the pressure becomes enough that it forces the AV valve to open. This is happening in relaxation. So the heart doesn't actually have to contract. The heart can just sit there, and this happens. Right, so blood's returning, it's filling it up. That's going to pop these AV valves open, and then most of this blood's going to drop into the ventricle. So that's happened before we even do anything. So now I've said that most blood's dropped in. Last 25 milliliters are squeezed in. I don't know why I'm using these words. So most of the blood's going to drop in, but there's going to be about 25 milliliters left. your atrium contract. So the atrium contract to push that last 25 mils into the ventricle. So we can say that for sure the AV valves are going to be open. Another thing that we can say for sure, if the atrium are contracting, the ventricles are most definitely not contracting. So we're going to call that ventricular diastole. Diastole. Meaning relaxation. If the ventricles are contracting, the atrium are relaxed. Atrium contracting, ventricles are relaxed. Unless something's seriously wrong with you, they're not going to contract at the same time. So this is what's happening during atrial systole. And it's really just about you thinking about what's going on with the heart. So when the atria contract, that's pushing blood into the ventricles, right? So the next place the blood's going to go is into the ventricles. The AV valves have to open, the valve in between the atrium and the ventricle, they have to be open. And by the way, the semilunar valves are going to be closed. If one set of valves is open, the other set of valves is going to be closed. They're not all open at the same time. So even though I didn't write it, the semilunar valves are closed. And that's atrial systole. Now, there's blood in the ventricle. The ventricle, we're not even at that part yet. We're just talking about the atrium have done contracting, they've contracted, the blood's in the ventricle, how much blood's in the ventricle. And so there's a term for that. And we call that end diastolic volume. And that just means how much blood is in the ventricle when the ventricle's in diastole. Right? The ventricle's relaxing. So how much blood's in there? I mean, that was the atrium's job, right? The atrium receives the blood and gives it to the ventricle. How much blood did the atrium give to the ventricle? That's what EDV is, and diastolic volume. That's how much blood the atrium ended up giving to the ventricle. And the number, I don't give a shit about the number, to be honest, but it's about around 130 milliliters. I want you to know, not the number, I know that's the easier thing to memorize. I want to know what end diastolic volume means. I want you to know that EDV stands for end diastolic volume, and that just means how much blood's in the ventricle before it contracts. Or you could say how much blood's in the ventricle when it's relaxed. Check my time. It's only 10 o'clock, guys. Wow. Doesn't it feel like noon for you? Okay, this is atrial systole. What about ventricular systole? Now it's the ventricle's turn to contract. So if the ventricles are contracting, what's happening with the atria? They're relaxed. Yes. What's happening with the AV valves? Closed. Can you see this? No, camera won't follow me. Oh wait, maybe it will. No, it won't. All right. The AV valves are closed. Because when the ventricles contract, that blood tries to go back up into the atrium, and it closes those doors. It's like you had a classroom full of people, and we all tried to run out of this door that I'm pointing to, but you can imagine it. We all try to run out the classroom door at the same time. We're gonna close the door, because we're all trying to rush out at once. I'm gonna hit that door, and all of you are gonna like slam up against my back like we're at a concert. And that door is gonna be closed, and it's not getting open. That's what happens with like the AV valve, it closes. The semilunar valves are gonna open. Blood's gonna rush out. You're gonna read, I don't know if I talked about it in the other video I made. I don't care if you leave this out, but there's something called isovolumetric contraction and isovolumetric relaxation. You can ignore it if you see it in the book. There is like a slight period that all 4 valves are closed. For example, when the ventricle starts to squeeze, to contract, it shuts the AV valve, but it didn't squeeze enough to open the semilunar valves. So there's like a brief fraction of a second where they're all closed. That's what that's referring to. I don't mind if you skip it. So, AV valves closed, semilunar valves are open, the ventricles are contracting, therefore the atrium have to be relaxing. And now we push the blood out, that's it. Blood's leaving, not all of the blood. Because it's always like there's some blood left. So the question is, when the ventricles contract, so now we've got to use a different word. When the ventricles contract, how much blood's left in the ventricle after it's done contracting? So end systolic volume. I want to know how much blood, I want to know 2 things. I want to know how much blood left the heart, how much blood left the ventricle. That's the most important question. But I can figure that out by knowing how much is still there. So end systolic volume is how much blood is still there. I don't know what it is exactly. I'm going to make up a number here. I'm going to say 65 because that makes it easy for me. I think it's like 70. Who knows? End systolic volume. How much blood is left in the ventricles after they've contracted? So to make it easy for me, I said half. So how much blood's in the ventricles before it contracts? How much blood's in the ventricles after it contracts? If I subtract the 2 numbers, that gives me something called stroke volume, which you need to know. So stroke volume, that's saying how much blood are we pushing out of the heart. So it is N diastolic volume minus N systolic volume. How much blood was in the ventricles before it contracted? How much blood's in the ventricles after it contracted? If I subtract the 2, then I know how much got sent out. Stroke volume. It's kind of like ejection fraction. 65 is not a bad ejection fraction. But anyway, that's what stroke volume is. Of course, we don't want to look at just one heartbeat. That's not going to tell us. Okay, so I know what stroke volume is, that's 1 heartbeat, but I need to look at it more than that, right? So I want to get like a cardiac output. So, well, okay, I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me finish cardiac cycle. So here we are with ventricular systole. AV valves closed, atrium are relaxed, semilunar valves open up, blood goes out, not all of it, a good amount. How much is left? That's ESV and systolic volume. And then now it's time for the heart to relax. So it relaxes. It's not contracting. The valves are going to close. When the ventricle contracts and it like squeezes and there's like a lot of pressure in the middle, the semilunar valve opens up and all that blood, not all of it, but the blood's going to leak. When that ventricle relaxes again, it starts to go back, and the blood that just left, it wants to go back. That's what happens every time the atrium or the ventricles relax. The blood that just got sent out tries to turn around and go back in. It's all about pressure, right? Blood wants to be wherever the pressure is lower. So when you relax a ventricle, the blood that was just in there wants to go back in. But it can't, because that closes. So the semilunar valves are going to close. The AV valves are currently, for some of this time, they're going to be closed too, because the atrium are filling with blood. So let me write that down. Atrium, nothing's contracting at this point. The atrium are filling with blood. So that seems simple, right? If you haven't done the lab work for the heart yet, this would be a good time to do it, to kind of learn the blood flow through the heart. They're coming, like, it'd be nice if you knew what the blood was, like, what's going into the atrium, right? So it's the pulmonary veins on the left side, and on the right side, it's going to be the vena cava, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. That's kind of like the heart anatomy, right? So the labs will take care of that. And then I think it's at the beginning of the video I made, like the introduction. So the atrium are filling with blood. Eventually, it was like that picture that I drew over here with the red. Eventually, enough blood's going to get in there, and it's going to open the AV valves, and you're going to have what's called rapid ventricular filling. I'll try to post a couple of, like, I'll look around YouTube and try, there's a couple of videos that will show you what it looks like. If you see the picture of like the animation of it happening, it makes it a lot easier, because what I've done is I've taken a process that's not too difficult when you look at it, and I've broken it down into a lot of steps. When you look at the thing happen, when you see the heart working, like contracting and relaxing, it'll make sense. You watch it for 10 seconds, it'll make sense to you, right? So I'm actually making it harder than it needs to be. But I mean, this is what happens in each of the stages. And I actually made it a lot easier. Your book makes this a lot more difficult. But you should have an idea of what's going on with the heart, what's going on with the... So when you answer the question, what's going on with the valves? And each stage, what's going on with the chambers? So what's happening with the atrium and the ventricles? And then you have to say, what about the blood? Where is the blood? Is it there? Is it gone? Did it come from somewhere? Is it going somewhere? So here, then you're going to remember EDV. Here you're going to remember end systolic volume. Here, the blood's starting to fill the ventricles right now. We don't have either. It's like it's starting to fill it up. The atrium hasn't contracted yet. It will. That's the next step. Right? Most blood dropped into the ventricle. That's what I'm saying here. So this right here is this. This is rapid ventricular filling. So we're back to the beginning of the circle. That's a question that I'm definitely going to ask you. I feel like it's important for some reason, but I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you this. I'm looking for ED. I'm looking for you to explain what end diastolic volume is. So you can write that out. It's not hard. You know how to spell end. You've been spelling it for many years. You know how to spell volume. You've been spelling that for many years. Just use your two new words, systolic, diastolic. So I want to know what end diastolic volume is. I don't care how much it is. I want to know what end systolic volume is. I don't care how much it is. I don't even care how much stroke volume is. I just want to know that you know what stroke volume is. It's that. If you wanted to be sure that you have it, just say how much blood is leaving the heart when it beats. Or how much blood is, if you wanted to even be more exact, how much blood is being ejected from the ventricle during a heartbeat. Well, I don't care if you don't put that exactly. How much blood is leaving the heart? And that's what matters for this whole thing. You know, when a cardiologist, they really want to know at the end of the day, how much blood is leaving the heart every time it beats. We need to know that. If it's strong and it's good, then that's what's circulating through the body. If it sucks, we're going to have some problems. Any questions on this? I'm going to talk about what affects stroke volume. There's a few factors that can affect stroke volume. That might be the last thing I'm going to talk about too. Not the last thing for this chapter, but so what is this? Question 4. Factors affecting stroke volume will be question 5. So I'm going to erase this. Oh, before I get into factors affecting stroke volume, stroke volume times beats per minute. That gives me cardiac output. I totally made it. That's cardiac output. So stroke volume times beats per minute. So stroke volume, I'm going to say 70. That's probably more accurate. So I need an even number. 70 milliliters. Every time the heart is contracting, it's pushing out 70 milliliters. Just for an example. Then, how many times does your heart beat per minute? That's a big number, but I want to make it easy for me. So I'm going to say 70 beats per minute. Because I know 7 times 7. I know all my 7s from football. I always was happy when the 7s came up, like in 2nd grade. I'm like, I got 7s. Of course, the Saints were sucking that year, so it was difficult to really learn the 7s because they weren't doing 7s. But so 70 times 70 beats per minute. So 70 times 70. So in this case, cardiac output would be about 4,900 milliliters. I'm not going to make you do that. I'm just giving you an example. You know what I'd like you to know, though? I want you to know how many liters that is. You should be able to already have the answer. It should be right in your head. How many liters is this? It's automatic. The same number, 1,000 milliliters, 1 liter. That's just something that you should start knowing now, right? Have an idea of what a liter looks like, and now you can see that with a bottle of Coke. Have an idea what half a liter is. I was telling you like a water bottle. Have those ideas like in your head. and be able to go back and forth, you know. These are things like if you're a nurse that gets screwed up. Math, there's 2 reasons that you're gonna get in trouble if those of you that are going to go be a nurse. There's 2 things that are gonna get you in trouble. One's math and 2 is drama. So stay out of drama. Drama leads to the math problems. Right? You're at the station gossiping who slept with who. You're carrying that in your head when you go to check on a patient or not check on a patient, and it's why you screw up. You know, if the orders say that that patient should get a vial of something, right? You're supposed to draw part of a vial and give it to that patient. Sometimes they make a mistake, and then you have 8 vials. And so common sense would be like, no, man, I shouldn't be drawing up 8 vials and sticking it in this person, right? But sometimes you just get so relaxed and you're so caught up in like that drama, and you fuck that up. And if you're gonna be a nurse, it's all you. Everything's you. Everything's your fault. Always. Everything's always your fault. It's not the doctor who's getting the big money. It's no one else. Everything's on you. So don't mess up your math. Look for decimal points, look for zeros, use your intuition, right? It's all life. Everything stops with you, even though it shouldn't. I just wanted you to know, take off the numbers, don't memorize the numbers. Stroke volume times how many beats per minute, right? So what can affect stroke volume? This is my last thing I'll do today. Preload. Preload affects stroke volume. This is how much can the ventricle stretch out before it contracts. So the amount the ventricle can stretch before it contracts. The more it stretches out, that means the more blood it can hold, right? And so you're going to have more stroke volume. So there's different things that affect preload, which we're not going to get into, but that's what preload is. The amount the ventricle can stretch before it contracts. The other one is the strength of the contraction, which we call contractility. The strength of the contraction. That's what norepinephrine does. Norepinephrine increases contractility. We've talked about epinephrine, we never talked about norepinephrine. It increases the strength of the contraction. The stronger it contracts, the higher stroke volume you're going to get. Or the opposite, right? If any of these things, if it's not stretching out enough because you're old, you know, things don't stretch when you're old. It's like a loose pair of underwear. That elastic just doesn't hold up anymore. Your body's like that. Contractility, you get old, it's not as strong as it used to be. And then afterload. I'm going to write this one because it's kind of a messed up. All right, so it's the, because I got to think about 2. I know it isn't, but, all right, the amount of force exceeded, I'm going to write it and then I'll explain it. The amount of force that must be exceeded before ventricular ejection can occur. what we're really talking about is the semilunar valve. How much pressure can we build up in that ventricle? Like the ventricle squeezing, how much pressure can we build up before those semilunar valves pop open and all the blood rushes out? The more force we can get in there, the more pressure, the more force, the more our stroke volume. So those are the three factors. Okay, that's question 5. Question 6, you are going to look up on your own, and it is the blood flow through the heart. That's simple. Where does blood go? Right ventricle, right atrium. You can start wherever you want. Right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, pulmonary valve. Then where is it going to? It's going to go to the lungs. Comes back through the lungs to the pulmonary veins. Left atrium, mitral valve, left ventricle, out to the aortic valve, into the aorta. That's going through the body, back to the semilunar valves. Back to the vena cava. So that's at the beginning of the lecture. You can also Google it and you'll find it listed out. I might have listed it out in my lecture, but I'd like you to have an idea of where blood flows through. Right? That was really the first part of the lecture, the anatomy part that I was, I went right into physiology today. So that gives you 6 questions. I will ask probably like just 5 of them, but you know all the questions for the quiz. So, do you have any questions? I'm going to stop recording. If you guys want to stay on and ask anything, you can. If you want to drop off now, you can.
Oh,
Yeah.
you still don't give us information if you wanted to